Writing a book is something that we've all probably considered at some point. We all have some type of expertise or passion we would like to share with the world. But the methodology on how to do it, let's just say that might not be in our inventory. Nevertheless, the interest of writing a book is still there. And with the current economic situation going on, there's probably no better time than the present to get started. If you're watching this and the crisis of the illness, which you can probably read between the lines to figure out, has passed, I want to give a big applause just to humanity in general for getting through it. If it hasn't passed yet, remember that it is temporary. But in the meantime, we do need to make income from home since we've been self-quarantined. So in this video, I'm going to go through the process of how I wrote The Anatomy of Financial Success. And stick around to the end of the video because I'll share with you what the next part in the Working From Home series will be. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video produced by Financial Anatomy, the place where you can take control of your financial destiny. For those of y'all that don't know about Financial Anatomy is a company created by me that serves as the foundation for giving young people a strong financial education since the school system has failed to do that. And this is part 3 in a series called Working From Home. And this series was born based out of the fact that at the time of this recording, a lot of us have been self-quarantined because of the illness and the economic ramifications of that. You know what the illness is, so I'm not going to name it. Unfortunately, that does mean that a lot of people's income has been reduced to zero. And while the government may be talking about having some kind of stimulus package, let's just be honest. Will it be enough to cover all your bills? And if it is it enough to cover your emotional wants? Only you can decide that. But this can be a blessing in disguise because if you wanted to write a book for a while, since you're at home, you got plenty of time. Honestly, there's no better time than the present. And even if the self-quarantine has passed, you still want to have that passion to write a book. And if you do it right, it can be an asset which just pays you dividends in the future. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the process which I use to write The Anatomy of Financial Success. And for those of y'all that are wondering, is it a quote unquote real book? I know there are a lot of books out in online marketing that just serve as a lead magnets to get your email. And I'm not knocking them, but it is a legitimate book. There's an audio book that's in the works and it's over 200 pages. And you can check it out on Amazon right now if you don't believe me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So there are 7 steps to writing a book. And before we go any further, I want to really specify that this is just the writing of the book. I will not be talking about the marketing of the book because that's a whole another separate topic. We're just talking about the writing. So step 1 is to actually pick a topic. You might be wondering, how do you pick a topic? Well, first you got to decide exactly what area do you want to write a book in. And for those of y'all that might be wondering, there's just too many things to think of. How can I narrow that down? Just think about these 3 things. Where's your passion or interest or expertise? Is it in finance, health, or relationships? Generally speaking, those are the big, I'll say, genres in nonfiction. Also keep in mind that these strategies work for nonfiction, so I'm sorry you fiction writers, but I always go through processes I've done and I've never written a fiction book, so I'm just going to stick to nonfiction. To give an example, for me, it was finance, obviously. And once you've narrowed down which of the 3 that it's going to focus on, next thing you want to do is niche down. So within that category, what area do you really just have a grasp on or have a passion on that you're willing to learn and get experience in? For me, it was personal finance. There's different topics in the area of finance. Business, there's personal finance, there's strategic management. I mean, the list goes on, but that's the category I decided to focus on. So you got to do the same thing with whichever topic you decide to narrow in on. One strategy that goes well with finding a topic is to get 3 sheets of paper and you put each category for each sheet of paper. So on one paper, health, one paper, finance, one paper, relationships. Next, just write anything that comes to mind. It doesn't matter how clumsy it is or how strange it may seem to you, just write it down. Next, you're gonna review these lists, and there's gonna be a few of them that just really stick out at you, like, man, I got a fire burning in me that I really just wanna write about that. From there, you put that on a separate sheet of paper, and then you have narrowed it down to at least 10 things. And once these 10 things are in front of you, once again, one of them is gonna be screaming at you. Now from here, you have a few options. You can either pick one, and if one is just really screaming at you, by all means go with it. But honestly, if you can find a way to combine maybe two of them, that can also work too, as long as it makes sense. While you're doing this, one thing you want to ignore is you might be tempted to go ahead and decide on the title for the book. Don't do this. You want to write the book first, then come up with the title later. And the reason why that is because it has a lot to do with marketing, which I won't be covering in this video, but it's just a good tip to know. Once you have your topic in mind, the second thing you need to do is decide who your target audience is going to be. For me, my target audience is obviously young adults. Now, the term young adults can span anywhere from 18 to 35, but specifically my book is more so for people 18 to 30. See how I narrow it? If I wanted to get even more specific, I could even narrow it down to 18 to 25. The problem is the school system has failed to teach young people the tools they need to be financially successful. So you find people in their late 20s who are just not learning these financial concepts, which, if we're being honest, we should have been taught in high school. But that's a discussion for another video. Of course, that's just the age range. You have other things to consider too, like what is their ethnic background and things like that. For me personally, finance is a universal concept. So it's easier for me just to nail down the audience because all I was really looking at was the age. But if your book is a little more niche down, you want to think about things like age, ethnic background, things like that. But on the same token, if it's not so niche down, then maybe the only thing you need to take a look at is the age. Before we move on to number 3, I would want to say if you're enjoying this video, give it a like, really helps out a lot. And consider subscribing if you're new so you can catch the next series, or the next part in the series rather, in the Working From Home series, which teaches people the tools and techniques they can use to efficiently work at home and start bringing in income. Now I know some of y'all are wondering, okay, I know who the book is for and I now have the topic, but how the heck do I actually get from just these thoughts on paper to an actual polished book? Well, we use step 3, which is a little technique called mind mapping. Some of y'all may be savvy to the technique of mind mapping, but for those of y'all that aren't, let's just Google it. When I started writing The Anatomy of Financial Success, I put the topic in the middle of a sheet of paper, and I just started drawing lines of thoughts that I was thinking that could be potential chapters. And that's how you start the mind mapping process. For me personally, I spent about an hour on this process. This is something I wouldn't rush. In fact, I would actually make my outline and just wait a day. More thoughts may come in, just add them to the outline, no problem. But the idea is just to let things kind of flow, let things come out of you, and give time to just have this marinate in your head as to what you want this book to be. You'll be putting together a full picture and you won't even realize it. That's why I say you should at least wait a day after doing your mind map. Once the day had passed, then I created the outline for my book, and the outline is pretty much organizing all those ideas into chapters on another sheet of paper. And this outlines the whole structure that you'll be using for your book. From here, I did the same mind mapping technique that I did with the topic of the book. So each chapter I put in the center of the page, did the mind mapping, and then wrote the chapter from there. One thing I will mention is I actually did not do this all at once. I would do this per chapter, then write the chapter, then when moving on to the next chapter, I would repeat the mind mapping process. The reason being is because as you write your book, you pick up a sequential rhythm of just flowing, and you're gonna think about things that you hadn't thought about in the initial mind map. So you can add those in future chapters or add them in the current chapter, and it really just helps the idea of flowing through the book as opposed to just mapping everything out initially. Now you can map everything out initially, but be kind of prepared to be adding stuff in the chapters because thoughts are going to come to your mind. So I recommend doing it that way. Before we move on to step 4, I do have a little hack that you're going to really thank me for, but you need to come up with a schedule for when you're going to write your book. Obviously, anytime you can squeeze in if you're a very busy person is good, but at the same time, you do need to prioritize getting it done. So me personally, every time I would get home, either I would think about writing my book, or at the very least, I'd write a certain amount of words or a certain amount of paragraphs before I went to sleep. Now I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have days where you're not going to feel like writing your book. And writing is an emotional subject, so it's not as simple as, oh, I'll just muscle through it and cut off my emotions because I don't feel like it. It's not that simple. You got to really be feeling it, otherwise things are not going to flow and you're going to encounter something known as writer's block. So one thing that really helped me flow when I was writing my book is actually to create a playlist of music that just really calmed me down or got me excited to write the book. When you do this long enough, the music will start to trigger something in your psyche that just starts having thoughts flow and it puts you in the writing mood. The reason this is the case is because the right side of your brain is going to associate certain feelings with certain sounds. For those of y'all that were in some type of music setting the first time you had your first kiss, provided it was exotic between you and your partner, you probably remember that kiss when that track pops up. So that song that comes on the radio, you're just kind of briefly taken back to that first kiss. Well, you can create the same process when it comes to writing, and that will put you in the mood to knock out your chapters. So that's just a quick little hack. If you follow the process through completion, you will have your rough draft. And now we're going to get into step 4, which is creating the second draft. Now, creating your second draft is going to be emotionally draining. I'm just warning you now, because the process is you're going to take your rough draft and verbally read it out loud to catch little errors or incomplete sentences that you may have done in your rough draft, which you're going to catch them. I mean, no one's going to be perfect the first time around. That's not how this works. And when you catch these, you may feel kind of down. You may feel kind of depressed because you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is a sloppy piece of work. How is this going to work? Look, it's just part of the process. Okay. Muscle through it. And that's why you're going to get an editor to help you out later. But you do need to do your part and create that second draft. Besides, there's certain things that you'll catch that you might just want to change because as you're reading, maybe you just want it to flow better with your intentions for the book. So make sure to not skip this step. Some people skip this step and just hand it off to an editor, and it takes a lot longer and it may be more expensive too because you'll have more mistakes. So don't skip this step. Once you have your second draft, the next step is to produce your final draft, and this is step number 5. What this looks like is getting an editor, and depending on how heavy you want the editor to go, it can be expensive or it can be cheap. See, the editor can make structural changes to your books and move chapters around if you want that, or they can just make grammar and spelling changes. Now, there's certain phrases or certain types of editing. I'm going to put it on the screen so you can see. Me personally, when I was doing the Anatomy of Financial Success, I didn't want a structural editor to move chapters around because the book has a concept which flows throughout the book, and I wanted to keep it that way, and I did that intentionally. For those of y'all that have read the Anatomy of Financial Success, you'll notice that it has a theme of building your financial person up chapter after chapter, phase after phase, and by the time you're finished, you're a completely different person financially, and that's supposed to be the key. You know, phase 1 focuses on getting you in the right mindset. Phase 2 is on income. Phase 3 is on budgeting. Phase 4 is on how to spend your money. Phase 5 is on how to evaluate opportunities. I came up with all that before I wrote the book, so I didn't want an editor messing with that. But I needed grammar and spelling changes. Now, if you haven't come up with something like that for your book, you might want to consider getting a structural editor to make certain things, and you know what, this would be better here, etc. But if you consider yourself a very good holistic thinker, this may not be necessary. I would say use your best judgment, but generally speaking, if this is the first time you're producing a product, you may want to go ahead and go on with the structure side. Step number 6 is to finally come up with a title. Now that you've written your book, you have a full holistic view of what the book is about. Now you can come up with a title, because I want y'all to get it through your heads that a title is Nothing but marketing. Y'all think it's has something to do with the writing of the book? That's like 10% of it. 90% of a title coming up with it is marketing, because that's what's going to get a person to pick it up in the first place, in addition to the book cover, which we'll cover in the next step. So some key things to think about when coming up with a title is you want to go for something that's either bold or controversial. That's all I'm going to say. People have written whole books on how to come up with a title, so I can't cram that into one video. If you want to, you can look into it further, but it's going to come down to those two things. So let's look at the anatomy of financial success. This includes the subtitle too. So the anatomy of financial success, the key to building financial confidence and destroying financial insecurity. That's a pretty bold statement. You better be willing to back that up, right? So I went for the bold context. You can go for the controversial context. It just depends on which one you want. The point is to get someone to stop scrolling on Amazon or stop walking through in the bookstore to notice your book and pick it up. Last but nowhere near least is to make a book cover, or rather have one made. Now, if you're some type of graphic designer, that's your background, then you may have the skills to make a book cover. Me personally, I don't like that kind of stuff. I actually do have skills in designing. I just don't personally like it. So I had zero interest in designing my own book cover. So you can either hire a graphic designer or you can do it yourself. I don't recommend you do it yourself because you're leaving money on the table unless you have experience specifically in designing book covers. But a few sites you can get this done on is Upwork, Fiverr. I didn't mention this in the editing, but these freelance sites are a great place to pick up an editor too. And there's also a site called 99 Book Designs. If I'm butchering that name, I will leave the link in the description and you'll see what I'm talking about on screen. But they're pretty good. You pretty much pay a flat fee, and it's like $2.99 if I remember right. And when you pay that, a whole bunch of experienced artists submit their work, and then you pick a few out and run with them, which is pretty nice. I found when it comes to coming up with a book cover, unless you really have something that's very integral to the book, to just let the artists come up with the cover from scratch. Obviously, the title needs to be on it, but the artists, just let them know the objective of the book is to sell and to get people to stop scrolling on Amazon and actually click on that link so they can read your book. That's the objective, as well as whatever color schemes that you want. Now, obviously, you want to be flexible with that because colors is sales to some degree. So artists would probably know what colors work best to get the book to sell. So be willing to be flexible on that. But if you do have something that's integral to the concept of the book, like for me, the silhouette, which is the financial person, that's integral to the book. So that has to be on the book cover. You can let them know, but just realize don't be too rigid here, because the more rigid boundaries they have to work in, the less they can work their magic to make the book sell, because that's the objective. So remember the objective, okay? And that in a nutshell covers producing a book. Like I said, this has nothing to do with marketing. This part in this series is strictly focusing on writing the book. I don't actually have a part in this series that strictly focuses on book marketing. I do have one coming up for sales in general, which will be the next part in this series. But if y'all do want a specific video on marketing a book, leave it in the comments below. Maybe we'll do a bonus to this series to cover that. But that does it for this video. If you haven't done so already, give a like for the YouTube algorithm. It really helps a lot. Consider subscribing if you're new, so you can find out when the next video in the series drops, where we will be covering just sales in general. And for those of y'all that are wondering, even if you don't have a product to sell, that doesn't mean you can't enter the sales field, because there's plenty of products you can market online, and you can learn how to do all this from the comfort of your home. I'll catch y'all in the next video. Don't forget to get out there and take control of your financial destiny.